realized I was going to be outside today in terms of the presentation. Normally, did you guys that yet? Or can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Normally, I would be doing a presentation whereby there would be slides because the work is very visual in terms of trying to understand the people and the places that I describe. And also, I know some people learn orally, and some people learn visually, and some people, like to have the combination of the two. Myself, I like to have the combination of the two. So you can look at my website to see some of the things that I'm talking about. So maybe that'll be even better for you guys in terms of a little more research. So I am an African-American woman, historian, and heritage conservation consultant. And my work is about recovering, documenting, and sharing suppressed and neglected stories of people. Intentionally, my work is a social action practice to expand knowledge for the construction of a more inclusive public culture, historical memory, and national identity encompassing the diverse experiences of the American people and to help dismantle institutional racism. Today, my brief remarks will explore my recent book, Living the California Dream, African American Leisure Sites During the Jim Crow Era. Hold the book up, hold the book up. Hold the book up.
Promote it, promote it, promote it.
Thank you very much. For those, maybe pass one of the books around so that, yeah.
We want the one with your annotations in it.
And there's some pictures in there, so you can kind of, see some of the historical pictures. You won't be able to see some of the other pictures that I had that were more contemporary. But anyway, you can share. If you haven't seen it, just pass around. So anyway, today you're going to learn a bit about how African Americans made California and American history by challenging racial and class structures when they occupied recreation sites and public spaces at the core of the state's formative 20th century identity. These places and spaces became contested ground in development of attractive inland resort and beach areas relatively free from white citizens' harassment. In Los Angeles, recreation and relaxation were essential components of liberty and distinct civil concerns in the nation's long freedom rights struggle. Today, I will talk mostly about the stories of the Santa Monica Bay cities. I will discuss the impact of some of these stories and how they have impacted contemporary times, and give some instances of how they're being used for society's betterment. In contrast to the city where Black Angelenos lived, California waterfront and pastoral inland places where they went to relax and invest in real estate included in Los Angeles County, Bruce's Beach in Manhattan Beach, and some of you may have heard a little bit about that because it's been in the news a lot lately. Santa Monica's South Beach neighborhoods, Eureka Villa, known today as Valverde, which that's kind of close to you guys here, and that's in the Santa Clarita Valley, and in Riverside County, Lake Elsinore and Corona's Park Ridge Country Club. And there's a few other places that I look at in the book as well. At these places, African Americans found joy, developed businesses, invested in real estate. They embraced the booster-promoted California dream of a leisure lifestyle in picturesque outdoor settings, new life opportunities, even while discrimination and lax enforcement of California civil rights laws established as early as 1893 many times prevented them from using various public or private facilities, and buying land in many areas for decades into the 20th century. And just, I don't think I mentioned so far, but the Jim Crow era years that I'm interested in are 1900 to 1964. It's a longer period of time than that, but those are the particular years I'm focusing on in my talk. So the African American group moving here during this era was much more self-confident and sometimes militant in demanding their rights as citizens and as consumers. Mostly relocating from southern states in escape of the worst of Jim Crow era anti-black racist restrictions, African American migrants began moving from the South in large numbers to the Los Angeles area in the decades surrounding the turn of the 20th century. They joined a multi-ethnic community that included whites and people of color, along with migrants of many other backgrounds. Despite racial discrimination challenges they found in their new home, African Americans actively participated in California's development throughout the early 20th century Great Migration. They bought homes and other property, raised families, launched businesses, created social and faith institutions, and nurtured a rich cultural milieu that included the emergence of West Coast jazz and R&B music. As Californians undertook leisure, many found it restricted and themselves excluded from the way of life, and white boosters broadcasted this rhetoric and imagery about leisure lifestyles, pleasures, as messages in the mass media, speaking to white consumers to create a sense of place in California, in the California social and physical landscape that excluded Jews and people of color. In the white boosters' messages, Black and other communities of color were situated as laborers, if at all, rather than neighbors and social equals. Unwilling to accept exclusion, Black Angelenos, like their brothers and sisters in other places around the nation, developed separate spaces for emotional and physical rejuvenation to circumvent the oppressive racial subjugation of the era and to promote a renewed sense of racial pride, cultural self-expression, economic independence, and a mix of progressive political perspectives that were the embodiment of the new Negro determined to achieve fuller participation in American society. The experiences and memories of these leisure spaces and destinations and the attention that they gained in public memory and newspapers of the era offered African Americans new and broader visions of themselves, a new identity, and a new collective sense of freedom, contributing to cultural and intellectual efforts that defined the new Negro. In California, African Americans' ambitions and initiatives for leisure space also radically claimed, challenged, and promoted the state's identity in consumption of leisure as a lifestyle that would spread across the nation to develop a new American suburban middle-class culture and identity. So in 1912, here you would have the slide of Bruce's speech. In 1912, Willa Bruce, supported by her husband Charles, purchased Pacific Ocean shoreline property to create a resort service business that became known as Bruce's Beach. The place between 26th and 27th Street streets in the city of Manhattan Beach in the southern western portion of Los Angeles County was a very popular gathering place for African Americans of all social classes on weekends and in the summertime. A successful venture spurred this successful venture spurred other African Americans to buy land and to build cottages nearby. From the first day of operation, the Los Angeles Times newspaper reported, yes, the Los Angeles Times newspaper, reported that many Manhattan Beach white supremacist residents, including city founder George Peck the city founders George Peck and Frank Doherty, undertook private harassment actions and eventually legal sanctions to discourage African American people from visiting and settling in the area. By the 1920s, the Ku Klux Klan also joined these harassment actions to push out the Bruce's Beach resort property owners and day trippers. A proposal to seize the Manhattan Beach North End neighborhood through eminent domain proceedings to create a park was submitted by private white citizens to the city council and was finally approved in 1924. It was pointed out that if a park was needed, there was other property nearby containing fewer buildings which could have been condemned with less trouble and expense. In the mid-1920s, this area where Bruce's Beach was almost uninhabited, rural, and the most remote Manhattan Beach shoreline section. After challenges to these proceedings were unsuccessful, the evicted Bruce and other Black resort community property owners settled for the most favorable sale price they could obtain. Now, whether they were adequately compensated for their land and lost socio-cultural economic opportunities has remained open to debate into the 21st century. Racial prejudice, aided by abusive use of state power, eliminated the African American residential and economic development of the Bruce's Beach establishment and small residential cottage community, along with destroying Black beachgoers' social space with attempts to erase the site's memory from history. Only through political assertion has a limited revival of the history of Bruce's Beach and its incorporation into the public record emerged in the early decades of the 21st century. In their first organized civil disobedience action in the region, members of the Los Angeles branch of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People in 1927 challenged Manhattan Beach officials when they tried additional measures to make the beach white only. Although the Bruce's Beach community was destroyed when the NAACP members staged a swim-in protest for which they were arrested and fined, through legal maneuvers, clarification was won that African Americans had the legal right to enjoy this and all California beaches. This was an important civil rights and beach access victory, not only for African Americans, but for all Californians.